This is the Open University.
Sexy torture dungeon. I've got a box of plastic melons, chrome yellow, titanium white, extra dark but extra bright. This book of river, rainbow poo, it's all bright orange, sweet and electric like you. Good morning, it's Open University again. The university is now on air, broadcasting modern architecture. This is a very interesting book which I bought the other day in Le Marais, in the Swiss Institute bookshop, I think it's called. I don't know what the Swiss connection is, but this is, it's actually the Canadian Centre for Architecture and JAPSAM Books which put this out. And I'll just read what it says in the back here. The university is now on air, broadcasting modern architecture, examines a key experiment by the Open University to mobilize new media environments for distance and adult education. And it's a close reading of course A305, the history of architecture and design, 1890 to 1939, which was taught through television and radio broadcasts, aired on the BBC between 1975 and 1982. A very formative time for me, your faux lecturer, and that particular course was a very formative course on me because it led me away from the kind of banal mainstream programming that you'd see on television. In those days there were only 3 channels on UK television, and they were all kind of pitching to family viewing, inverted commas. There was no sense of, anything about design and architecture, or other esoteric territories like mathematics or whatever. These were pointers to a new world, and this book's very interesting because it goes into the kind of tensions, the intentions of the people who set up the Open University, notably Harold Wilson, but also the tensions between the production people who had to make educational units but were using the resources of the BBC, which was an entertainment and propaganda, obviously, network set up by the government. And the book is laid out in the sort of style of Understanding Media, McLuhan and Quentin Fiore. So it's got this kind of big typeface layout with a sense of the radicality of the 1960s and the radicality of this as one of the great 60s government ideas, to have an open access university. And the reason I spoof things I love, so the reason I spoof this institution, which is now sadly run down, is that I think it was a really fantastic idea just to have a sort of a platform promulgating these ideas which were out of the mainstream and which were important for, I suppose it was a part of a certain model of knowledge which no longer exists, which was overturned by postmodernism. Postmodernism proposed that high and low were no longer distinct, and that the sort of brains trust idea, I call it for shorthand, the brains trust idea of there being experts and intellectuals and great thinkers who had to be listened to with respect by the general audience. That idea was overturned, and in Britain especially, a kind of populist neoliberal and postmodern post-war contract replaced it, which was that popular culture should be studied intelligently by intellectuals. Their job was simply to be sort of a reverse of the Marxist role for the intelligentsia. In this capitalist and neoliberal intelligentsia model, all that intellectuals could do was talk about football, pop music, dog racing, whatever. I mean, to some extent, George Orwell might have started that. And it was a good thing for a while, but when all the intellectuals of one country are simply talking about mainstream working class culture, or even worse, that reappropriating and bourgeoisifying things like football, which were the preserve of the working class, something is wrong. And something has been wrong for a very long time in Britain. We're seeing it now with huge cuts to education, cuts to arts funding. Not really sure what kind of cultural landscape will emerge. There are even, for instance, rumblings at the Architectural Association, people wondering how they can justify their enormously high fees and justify the kind of And there have also been planning changes, which have been, Dominic Cummings, the dark master behind the British Prime Minister, has just laid out some new planning suggestions, which are essentially saying, let's do away with all planning, let's have a coup against the civil servants. The planning system has been very faulted and problematical in Britain for a while, but it did include things like affordable housing measures, which are now being swept aside. Anyway, so I'm sure the Open University will also fall victim to the kind of problematic, which is that British education has been depending on high-paying, wealthy foreign students for a long time, and these people can no longer go to Britain. So there's going to be there is a reckoning. This was in a sense, distanced learning before COVID, before the era of the pandemic. You could do Zoom conferencing, if you like to call it that. You can get your course materials, and they were all rather nicely designed with a sort of understated aesthetic. And this, there are sort of drawings and illustrations in here of some of the course materials, interviews with the people who were both learning and teaching. I actually had a flatmate, Vicky, in the early 90s, whose aunt was a producer for the Open University, so she would drop by and we'd chat about her work from time to time, and I found that very interesting as well. I can only ever be a satellite to these institutions. I could never be within them. I'm not that kind of person. But I'd like to spoof them affectionately. The other book that I've been enjoying this week, or this couple of weeks, I've been here 3 weeks on this trip, is a manga by Yaro Abe called Maladroit de Naissance, Born Clumsy, I guess you'd translate it as, and it's really a memoir in drawing, an autobiography of the formative childhood years of Yaro Abe, although he's referred to in the book. The character is Makoto, and the real star of this book is his working class father, who's a plump construction worker, construction manager, site manager for construction companies, and whose simple pleasures are farting, lying on the tatami mat. It's very Showa era kind of Japan, which is depicted here, tatami mats and endless eating of ramen, and festivals, the summer festivals, the seasons changing, going to see the Expo 70 in Osaka, the World's Fair, which was a big event, and this is set in Kyushu, but Makoto, the hero, has some uncles who live in Osaka who take him to the Expo 70. He's 3 years younger than me, so I share a lot of these memories from a Western perspective, but with a slight décalage of 3 years. So I found this very, very good. It's actually the first time I've ever read a manga backwards, as it were, in the Japanese fashion. So not just starting at the back. Here's the father lying on the tatami mat with his son, always in his underwear. Son is doodling away, the future manga artist there. And the kotatsu table here. It goes into black and white very quickly. There are like 3 pages of colour, then it's in black and white. But it's just a very simple and very touching story of the narrator's childhood. And even the speech bubbles, you have to read them from right to left, and you read across the page from right to left as well, in the Japanese fashion. This is something that's very interesting about France, is that you have, each country you go to has different relations with other countries, obviously. And Britain, as far as I'm aware, you can't get translations of serious Japanese manga like this. I don't think Yaro Abe is known to Anglo-Saxon readers. There's a fantastic publisher called Le Lézard Noir, the Black Lizard, which publishes these. I think it probably has more Yaro Abe titles as well. I might well look into those. I'm less into the fantasy stuff. I like people just talking about their lives. And this was a really nice summer read. I felt like I was lounged on the tatami myself, and I sort of saw Japanese lives from inside, and there's nothing really exceptional. It's not like Birth of an Artist or anything like that. He's very modest and humble, of course, and really emphasizing how he's second best at everything. He has a cousin who's beloved of all the girls in his school who comes along, and so he's displaced even by his own cousin, who's much more popular and athletically, skillful. But of course, it's the usual story, which is that in the end, these quiet people who have artistic talent do come to some kind of prominence and do get noticed eventually. So this I thought was really nice, and I do love the fact that this is a country that really values manga and anime here, and that they will go to the lengths of translating whole books of... we've got some other ones here, actually, which don't belong to me. These are my girlfriend's. Kazuo Kamimura, Lorsque nous vivions ensemble, since we've been living together, or since we lived together. Maybe I'll read that next. I don't know. Of course, I talked before in one of these about Yuichi Yokoyama. Actually, Libération, the French daily paper, which is an excellent paper, by far the best daily paper of any that I know and subscribe to, has been running a series of whole-page mangas recently. And there's a guy, I forget his name, I'll put a caption of his name. There's a guy in France who really is influenced by Yuichi Yokoyama. Now, that's a good example of the culture spreading, that if you have a publishing industry which is publishing these books, these serious manga, serious inverted commas, they also publish. It's essential that they also publish unserious mangas. Just that there's a range of this art form available on the market in bookshops, and he's this guy. They published a couple of weeks ago full-page spreads of this guy who was obviously really copying Yuichi Yokoyama. I was slightly annoyed at first because Travel, this book, was one of the things he was copying, and I just thought, but at least he's interviewed and he admits that Yokoyama is his hero, his model, and he's such an original talent because he's so sort of autistic. His vision is so autistic and so different from the other rather sentimental or sort of story-esque manga artists or fantasy, whatever. That I think it's very unmistakable when you see someone who has been influenced by that rather distanced and weirdly robotic eye, which Yuichi Yokoyama has. You can't miss it, really. So at least he was fessing up to it. It's great that there is this culture. Of course, you have Asterix, you have Tintin. The Francophile world has always been very strong on a certain kind of lean, clear graphics, but also it became very important for French identity. The idea of Asterix, the plucky little Gaul fighting off the Romans, for instance, that's a clear part of, even if the real history is not particularly known, that kind of popular history is super important. Tintin, I'm a huge fan of Tintin, and something me and my girlfriend do to fall asleep at night sometimes is we make up new episodes of Tintin because of course there's only a fixed number. Although actually we were watching one the other day which was made by someone other than Hergé and made from all the usual elements, the usual ingredients. This is something I've been doing all my life. I've been making up fake spoof Tintins and drawing cartoon sort of obscene Tintins and things like that. So let me try and think of the one. I made one up yesterday. We kind of did a relay race structure where I'd tell the first part of it and then she would tell the second and so on until we pretty much fell asleep, giggling our heads off. But yeah, this one, let me start it. Tintin and Snowy are walking down a street in Brussels, and they come to the window of a gay bar and look through and see Professor Calculus sitting at a table with a figure who's just really a shadow. You can't see anything, any details of this character, but he looks sinister. And they wonder why Calculus is in a gay bar in the first place. And so Tintin's sort of staring in and saying to Snowy, let's just hang around and watch what's happening in there. But just at that moment, a policeman taps him on the shoulder and he's about to be arrested for voyeurism. But he explains to the policeman who he is and why his suspicions have been aroused. And the policeman, of course, is a fan of Tintin. This is a constant in all these detective stories, is that the police always know the detective and he's renowned throughout the land and therefore gets a a free pass. So the policeman tips his hat and moves on, and Tintin decides he would be less conspicuous if he went into the gay club himself. Of course, this becomes kind of slash porn, because, I don't know, people are always fascinated by making gay versions. There are all these posters around Paris of Tintin and Captain Haddock kissing, which have often been ripped rather angrily, presumably by Tintin fans. But also in the centre of town there's a huge mural, like an official mural of Tintin and Haddock kissing, again in just north of Les Halles, presumably in a gay area. And it's become almost like a symbol, it's almost as powerful a symbol of gayness when you see Tintin and Captain Haddock in an embrace, as, say, the rainbow flag is. So, I don't know, one is drawn always to these rather gay scenarios. Oh, by the way, I wanted to say as well that something weird has been happening to me recently, that I've been saluted often on the street as Madame. France is very gendered, and you're obviously either Madame or Monsieur. As soon as you enter any shop or public place, or even when you're accosted by a beggar for money, for quelques pièces, s'il vous plaît, Madame. So I think it's because of the face mask, it hides my beard, which apparently is the only characteristic of me being a man. Because the shoes kind of make quite a feminine noise, these Repetto shoes. And I guess I do wear women's clothes mostly. I am also physically partly a woman, because I had a corneal graft from a woman's eye. So in some way but I'm not I'm not proclaiming myself transgender. Please leave me out of all your definitions and all the rest of it. As Derek Jarman kindly said in his lyric, which I set to music, I am a not gay, in his film Blue. Derek Jarman hated the idea of being categorized and having to bat for one team or the other. But I am being... obviously one is being profiled as one goes down the street, and I am... Actually, somebody said, Monsieur l'intellectuel avec les lunettes, apparently I look like a Parisian intellectual. So if I look like a man, I look like a Parisian intellectual, which is fine, suits me fine. But otherwise, on a daily basis now, I get Madame rather than Monsieur. And then I just laugh and I say, en fait, c'est Monsieur. In fact, I'm Mr. But what do I care for such definitions? Anyway, yes, so gendering Tintin or queering Tintin is a fantastic hobby to have. So anyway, yes, Tintin goes into the gay bar and sits down at a table. Of course, he's underage for drinking alcohol, so he just orders an orange juice and he orders a bone for Snowy. And Snowy has this ability to stretch himself, to stretch his body into different shapes so he looks almost human. So he stretches himself long enough to sit down in a chair opposite Tintin, and his body is all woolly, looks a bit like Santa Claus on vacation or something. And it looks as if he's wearing a sort of sheep's fleece overcoat or tracksuit or something, and he's got a big bubbly white beard, because of course he's got this fleece, this fur all over. And he gnaws on his bone, or sips on his bone, not quite sure which. And they kind of try and listen to what's happening over at the table with Calculus, who is, of course, deaf. So, whatever is being said, Calculus is probably misinterpreting it and saying, the ankle, what do you mean, the ankle? And meanwhile, the shadow is bundling Calculus into a sack and dragging him out, not through the door, but through the window. And the window is not even open enough for the sack to go through, so Calculus is really being knocked around and bruised. Tintin, at this point, jumps up in dismay, tries to save his friend. And at this point, I have to explain that Rastapopoulos, the villain in many, the sort of Moriarty of the Tintin series, is planning world domination by switching off the Earth's magnetic fields. He hopes for all sorts of, communication satellites to plunge and chaos to ensue, during which he can take control, a bit like the Donald. He can dispense with democracy and take control. So this is probably why they need Calculus, because he has some essential information. As a scientist, he knows about the Earth's magnetic field, and so he can get kidnapped, unfortunately, by Rastapopoulos and taken away. Tintin is about to follow, running after Calculus, but the barman comes over and says, "I'm sorry, that those people who seem to be your friends haven't paid. You have to pay for them and for your bone and your orange juice." So Tintin's busy doing that, and there's a problem with his card. It's refused initially, and he tries to do contactless, and it doesn't work, and all this sort of anachronistic bullshit. Snowy, of course, is in human form, and he's very clumsy when he's stretched out like that. He can't really run on his hind legs. He wants to keep the illusion of being a human at least until he leaves the bar, the vicinity of the gay bar. But he's sort of staggering around, and not being very effective. Normally he would be on the ankles of the shadow by now, and but when Tintin and Snowy are both on the street with everything, paid, shipshape behind them, there's no sight to be found anywhere of the shadow with his sack containing Calculus. So Tintin, knowing the shape that many of his previous adventures have taken, heads for the airport, where he knows that there's going to be a plane in a bad state of repair that will crash halfway through the flight on probably a desert island, simply because this always happens. And actually it has really good results. He always solves his cases and does very well, precisely because the plane has crashed. So he goes to Orly Airport. He's in Brussels. He goes to the Brussels airport, and the mechanics have got a plane in exactly the right state of disrepair for him. They kind of must have guessed he was going to come along. And they say, "Here it is. It's it'll kind of get you off the ground, but it probably won't land. Here is exactly the kind of plane that you always have." So Tintin slips them a bit of a backhander and gets in the plane. And he's, of course, by this time he's woken up his good friend Captain Haddock, and Haddock is on board. And actually Haddock has changed his name to Brian Haddock, because he's a bit of a fan of Brian Eno this month in this adventure. He's been listening to lots of ambient music, trying to calm down because he's got various troubles weighing on him. And ambient music fits the bill, and also reminds him of some of his sea voyages, all those seagull cries and sounds of swelling seas, and the mast kind of, the yardarm and the halbert and the whatever those those nautical things are called. Thunder of breast, he exclaims when he's told the news that Calculus has been kidnapped, probably by an agent of Rastapopoulos. Let us climb onto an unairworthy aircraft and find Rastapopoulos' island hideaway. So they do that, and they just take off in the general direction of Réunion, which is, of course, a department of France in the Indian Ocean. And you can go there on holiday and still be in France, still use French postage stamps, which is very useful for your postcards home. If you want any more, you can sing it yourself, as they say. I think that's probably a good place to leave the story. It did go on. It was very, very elaborate, and the world was saved. You'll be glad to hear the world was saved at the end of it, and also that we both fell asleep. And we fell asleep in the knowledge that we had contributed to the genre of unauthorized manga narratology. And I suppose that, in a way, thematically ties together everything I've spoken about today, that there are connections between university lore, fake universities, and slash fiction manga plots. I guess that's all I have to say this week. I'm sorry it wasn't very coherent. I haven't done one of these for a few weeks, and I'm not sure, I kind of think that The Last Temptation of Bowie, as I like to call it, was kind of correct. It was actually one of the best things he did in later life, David Bowie, was withdraw from public life. Not feel he had to contribute to the internet. Although he loved the internet initially, I think he burned out on it very quickly, as was his wont. And he decided that personal life was super important. And I'm kind of getting to that stage now. I think now that the book's kind of done, I don't have to think about my life anymore and my past anymore. I think I'm going to probably think about the present and sunshine in my private life, as I put it in one of the lyrics on my current album, Vivid. I have fantastic sunshine, a little bit too much sunshine out there in the real world, a little bit too hot, and but I have a wonderful life, and I think I'm going to live it.
Open University.
sexy torture
dungeon. I've got a box of plastic melons, chrome yellow, titanium white, extra dark but extra bright. This book of rivet, rainbow poo, soul red,
orange, sweet and orange, like you.